I still remember that morning vividly, the way I walked into the 6th floor office, holding a warm cup of coffee, completely unaware that it would be the day everything turned upside down. My name is Bria, 33 years old, head of content strategy at Revy Media, a rising digital media company based in Austin, Texas, where everything from user emotions to viral trends can be monetized if you know how to harness them. With my brown hair tied back, low-heeled shoes, and focused eyes, I was the quiet type, yet every campaign I led struck the emotional chords that made audiences not only watch, but share, cry, or even change behavior after a 2-minute video. I was never the most attractive, nor did I excel at small talk or loud laughs, but I understood how this world moved on feelings. The emotional marketing projects I spearheaded had brought in millions of views and earned us several prestigious industry awards. No one on the team had ever questioned my ability, or so I believed. At the time, Revy Media was preparing to pitch a major campaign for Moonshade, a natural cosmetics brand aiming to reposition itself in the U.S. market. I had spent 6 weeks crafting an emotional framework centered on the theme of lost trust and the journey to healing, telling the story of a woman who walks away from a toxic relationship and rediscovers her true self through reconnection with nature and her instincts. It was the most heartfelt campaign I had ever worked on. I chose a personal, intimate narrative, steering clear of cliché commercial templates. I wrote the scripts, built the mood boards, collaborated with production on post-editing. I stayed late every night, sometimes until 10, not to impress anyone, but because I believed this campaign was our breakthrough, Revy's chance to enter the industry's top tier. I never imagined someone could take it away from me. Everything began to shift when the company's new CEO, Jared McConnell, decided to bring in a temporary creative supervisor for the Moonshade pitch. Her name was Natalie Ford, a rising media star from New York who had recently relocated to Austin. She was younger than me, articulate, and sharply dressed. I didn't think much of it at first. I never felt the need to compete with anyone. I just wanted to do my job well, but Natalie didn't come to collaborate. She studied my team closely, regularly requested previews of drafts, held private meetings with Jared, and always suggested small tweaks that, though subtle, slowly diluted the core message I had built. I stayed patient, believing that as long as the essence remained. Creative clashes were normal. Then came the email invite to the strategy presentation, with an attachment labeled Final Moonshade Pitch. The first slide listed the campaign lead, Natalie Ford. Creative director. My name was nowhere to be found. Not a single line credited me for the original concept. I sat frozen in front of the screen. It wasn't anger I felt, but a deep hollowness, as if every ounce of effort, every late night, and every piece of myself I had poured into the project had been erased. I brought the matter to Jared. He looked at me from across the conference table like I was disrupting a process already set in stone. Bria, I know you've contributed a lot, but Natalie reworked the campaign to better fit Moonshade's vision. You're still part of Revy, but I expect you to respect internal decisions. His voice was firm, without hesitation. In that moment, I understood what betrayal felt like, not from outsiders, but from the people I once called teammates. That same day, my team was disbanded. 2 colleagues were reassigned. 1 resigned. I was told to take a 2-week leave to reflect on personal direction. No thank you. No acknowledgement. Natalie walked past my desk that afternoon, smiled politely, and said, "Hope you get some good rest." I wanted to ask her how someone could so calmly steal another's work, but my throat closed up. I was too tired. I went back to my small apartment near the South Congress Bridge, the place where I made coffee every morning while gazing at the Colorado River, reminding myself that I lived in a vibrant city, a hub of creativity and startups. But that night, I sat alone in the dark. I didn't turn on the lights, didn't open my laptop, didn't touch my phone. I had no idea what to do. I was no longer the lead on the Moonshade campaign. I no longer had a team to return to. And more than anything, I no longer felt like myself in the home that used to give me peace. A text from my mother came at 9 p.m. Just one line. Dad asked why you haven't called lately. I didn't have the strength to reply. Everything was falling apart quietly. My father used to be a software engineer, a man who believed in the fairness of labor, who always taught me that effort is never wasted. But maybe he was wrong. For the first time in my life, I questioned whether I had been naive to believe that working hard and staying true would be enough to earn recognition. The values I had upheld and felt proud of now seemed like a cruel joke. A part of me wanted to disappear. The other part was angry, not just at the betrayal, but at myself for believing in a system that had no room for authenticity. I thought I was part of the Ravi family. Turns out, I was just the shadow behind someone else's spotlight. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat by the window, staring at the lights of distant buildings, and for the first time, I thought if I wanted to reclaim what was mine, I had to do it differently, not through words, not by begging for acknowledgement, but by creating something so undeniable they couldn't look away. But first, I needed silence. I needed to disappear for a while, to make sure no one knew what I would do next. The next morning, I made coffee like I always did, but for the first time in years, I didn't turn on my computer. No email, no Slack, no campaign timeline to review. The kitchen felt wider, quieter, without the sound of typing from the night before or the voiceover drafts echoing through my headphones. I sat down, watching the coffee cool in my hands, and opened the old storyboard for the Moonshade campaign. My handwritten notes, the clippings I had glued into place, even the voice memos I'd recorded when ideas struck on the drive home, were all still there, more alive than any polished deck Natalie had ever renamed and claimed. The feeling of betrayal still lingered like an open wound. But instead of stopping me, it reminded me that I had once created something of real value. I didn't need anyone's approval if I could still see the worth in my own work. I started small, gathering every fragment of past work that had never seen the light of day. There were ideas paused halfway because they didn't align with the company's direction. Proposals never approved. Campaigns discarded for not meeting the market's obsession with virality. I opened a new folder and named it simply Bria's Lab. I wanted a space to experiment freely, to bring back what had once been dismissed, not guided by KPIs or deadlines, but by raw, honest emotion. A week later, I began posting some of the older concepts online, under my personal account. No brand attached, no mention of the company I left, just pure stories. Short videos that touched on memories or quiet heartbreaks people often brushed aside. A mother packing pastries for her daughter on the day of her divorce. An aging father who couldn't hug his son, so he fixed the boy's car instead to say sorry. A couple trying to heal after losing their first child. No slogans, no call to action, just feeling. Surprisingly, the views began to climb. Comments weren't many, but every single one felt deeply personal. Someone wrote that they cried at midnight watching a 3-minute clip about a grandmother reknitting an old sweater she had picked up from her daughter's house. Another person messaged me privately, asking if I took freelance content work, saying they were developing a community project for young people with depression after the pandemic. I didn't respond immediately. I wasn't ready to accept contracts. I only wanted to know if I still had something real within me that people could see. But clearly, something I created was finding its way back to others. I started reading more about behavioral psychology, joined a few short courses on emotional storytelling in therapeutic contexts. I read less about media and more about healing, about belief systems, and how people rebuild after personal trauma. I realized that I had once used storytelling to help brands sell products, but now I wanted to use it to unlock something in the viewer, even if it never turned a profit. By the second month after leaving Revi, I began accepting freelance consulting invitations. A nonprofit called Roots of Grace reached out after watching my personal videos. They were launching a fundraising campaign to support women who had survived domestic abuse. I agreed to rewrite their campaign content. No dramatic imagery, no victimized voiceovers, just stories told by the women themselves about their own healing journeys. One woman had stayed silent for 5 years because she didn't want her daughter to find out. A young girl who had barely escaped an assault by her ex-boyfriend was now leading peer support groups with her story. I didn't charge them. I just wanted to see if storytelling could really help someone. When the campaign aired, the shares tripled expectations. A local news outlet featured it, and for the first time, I saw my full name credited in a public article without representing any organization. That night, I sat still for a long time. I was no longer the person hidden behind a project. I didn't have to stay anonymous, and I no longer needed my old company to feel like I mattered. But right then, a message came in from someone I hadn't heard from in a while. Jessie Thomason, an old colleague from Revi who had worked as a production assistant on my team, said that Natalie was about to launch her own agency and was renegotiating with Moonshade for a second branding package. He whispered that she was planning to reuse some of the strategies from the files I had once written, materials she had downloaded while she still had access. She assumed I wouldn't be able to do anything since I was no longer there. I wasn't sure what Jessie's intent was in telling me, but I understood one thing clearly. The game wasn't over. And this time, I wouldn't stay silent. I didn't feel angry when I read Jessie's message, at least not the way I would have before. Instead, there was a clear, cold feeling, as if my mind was recalculating every step that Natalie Ford had taken to see what more she might want to take from me. There are some people who don't know when to stop, and some who think that if they succeeded in belittling others once, they'll easily do it again. But this time, I wasn't the Bria from 3 months ago. I wasn't sitting around waiting for anyone to acknowledge me, nor was I scrambling to protect some outdated title or corporate project. I had begun to see my own new path more clearly, and because of that, I wasn't afraid of her anymore. I started reaching out to a few people in the industry again, not to vent or complain, but to verify the information. As it turned out, Natalie was indeed negotiating a new contract with Moonshade for their upcoming campaign for the Bloom line. It sounded harmless, but when I casually asked someone from the design agency, they sent me the preliminary brief. and I recognized the eerily familiar phrases. The journey of rebirth from old wounds, spreading the message of healing through inner beauty. Those weren't just phrases in my style. They were exactly the words I had once written in a private note file, never shared publicly. I went back to my external hard drive and dug into the folder from last year where I'd saved all the rejected concepts. The file titled Bloom from Ruins V6 was still there, with every edit time-stamped. It was an idea I had proposed for another campaign that Ravi had rejected because it was considered too gloomy and lacking viral potential. Natalie had never been officially shared that file. That could only mean that, while she had internal access, she had taken what she thought no one would remember to use for her own gain. I didn't have concrete proof that she had copied it directly, but I had more than enough reason not to sit back anymore. I sent a polite email to Valerie Connors, the brand manager at Moonshade, someone I had met once during a small workshop on emotional marketing I gave after leaving Revi. I didn't mention Natalie or the stolen campaign. I just thanked her for the previous conversation and attached a small file named A Different Perspective on Bloom. I didn't send a portfolio. I simply told a short story in a video I had made myself, exactly 2 minutes long, about a woman who lost her voice in a car accident and uses gardening to communicate with her son. No product information, no dialogue, just music, light, and a gaze. I didn't expect Valerie to respond. I just wanted to plant a seed of doubt in the very place Natalie thought she had control over everything. 3 days later, Valerie replied. The email was very short. Bria, I remember you. Could we chat more over Zoom this afternoon? I agreed. The call lasted 30 minutes. Valerie didn't ask me for proof that Natalie had copied my work. She just said that the idea I had sent made her rethink a lot of things, and that made me understand that if someone has truly seen value, no matter how much it's obscured by titles or the spotlight, sooner or later, they will see what's real and what's fake. A week later, I heard unofficially that Moonshade was reassessing the emotional direction for the new project. Natalie had no idea why, but I did. Natalie began showing signs of stress on social media. Vague posts about someone trying to sabotage the accomplishments of others. Cryptic stories hinting that someone in the industry is trying to climb by dragging others down. I didn't respond. I just kept working. Roots of Grace introduced me to another project, this time with a nonprofit education organization that teaches storytelling to at-risk youth. I agreed to mentor for free. Every week, I spent 2 afternoons at a small classroom in East Austin, helping kids tell their own stories through images, voiceovers, or simple animation. They didn't know who I was or where I'd worked. To them, I was just Ms. Bria, someone who knew how to listen and never interrupted when someone shared a story. One Thursday afternoon, while I was guiding a group of students through editing their first video, I got a message from Jessie. Natalie is facing a media crisis. A freelancer has accused her of using personal ideas without permission and violating an NDA. I sat still for a few seconds. Jessie sent a link to a post that was rapidly spreading on an industry forum. An anonymous account had published a detailed accusation, claiming that Natalie had copied ideas and used them to sell to clients without crediting the source. The content was very detailed, accompanied by a script that mirrored about 80% of what I had written. The poster didn't reveal their identity, but the writing made it clear they had internal access. I didn't know if it was Jessie or someone else, but I knew one thing for sure: Natalie was losing control. A few days later, Moonshade announced that they would pause the campaign to reassess the creative process and professional ethics of their media partner. Natalie went completely silent on social media. Her profile was set to private. One acquaintance told me that she had canceled several community consultation sessions due to health reasons. I wasn't happy or gloating, but I felt a strange sense of calm, as if I had just closed an old door that I had been standing outside, looking in at, for months. Natalie had thought I wouldn't dare to fight back, but perhaps she forgot that the more someone is pushed down to the bottom, if they can rise again, they don't need to retaliate noisily. Standing tall is already a form of revenge through success. There was one afternoon I will never forget. As I was leaving the classroom in East Austin, the sky opened up without warning, and the heavy rain pounded the pavement as if it wanted to wash away all the noise of the city. I took shelter under the awning of a second-hand bookstore, watching my students rush to the bus, their backpacks over their heads, their laughter ringing out in the rain like a slow-motion film. I stood there for a long time, still holding the USB with the final video edit from my group of young students, and a question that I had been avoiding for weeks echoed in my mind: if I could help them rewrite their stories. Why couldn't I rewrite my own life? I had once had a name, a position, and I was known for being the force behind some of the most successful emotional campaigns at Revi Media. But I let others take that away from me, and all I did was shrink back, waiting for something to happen instead of creating it myself. From that moment, I knew I couldn't continue working alone forever. I needed to come back, not as a victim, but as someone capable of rebuilding everything from the ground up, in my own way. That night, I opened the business plan I had started a year ago. At that time, I had considered starting a small content studio, specializing in emotional video campaigns, focusing on community-driven projects and brands that needed to build lasting relationships with customers through authentic storytelling. The idea had been left behind because work at Revi consumed me, but now things were different. I had time. My personal reputation was on the mend, and I had new, more valuable connections than any resume could offer. I called Sam, an old friend who worked in legal services, to consult on the process of establishing a business. I reached out to a few former colleagues who had left Revi earlier than I did, people who, like me, had been worn down by the industrial-style work system at Revi, asking if they'd be interested in starting fresh together. I didn't promise profits. I just said I wanted to create a place where ideas were protected, where no one's hard work could be taken away just because they weren't skilled at office politics or didn't communicate well enough. A week later, the first small office of my new venture, Ember Studio, officially had keys. We named it after the embers left behind. After a fire, a symbol of an ending, or perhaps a new beginning. There was no large sign, no grand opening, just three of us working in a glass-walled room overlooking a grassy field. Every day, we brewed our own coffee, wiped the whiteboard, and started editing our first videos. I emailed my old client list, the ones I had worked with when I was still freelancing, not to impress them, but just to let them know I was ready to take on serious projects again. A week later, we received our first contract from a nonprofit focused on mental health. They wanted a series of short videos to spread a message about healing after loss. I didn't need to read the brief too carefully to know this was the perfect project for Ember's DNA. Once the project was approved, I invited Jessie to join as a scriptwriter. She had left Revi after the incident with Natalie. She had an excellent eye for human behavior, and more importantly, She had witnessed how I was pushed out. We worked with intense focus, without the tight deadlines I had once known. But that didn't mean we lacked discipline. We prioritized quality and authenticity above all else. No line of dialogue was written unless it was true to the character's story. No scene was shot unless it accurately reflected the raw emotion we wanted to convey. 3 weeks later, the first episode was released on YouTube and the nonprofit social media. Within 3 days, the video had over 1 million views, not through paid ads, but through natural shares from viewers. One comment stuck with me, simply saying, "Thank you for speaking the words in my heart." Meanwhile, I heard that Natalie had pulled out of all media projects following the accusations of idea theft. There was no official lawsuit, but her reputation had been irreparably damaged. Moonshade switched to a new partner, and I received an unofficial consulting invitation from a member of their brand council. I declined. I didn't need to go back to the old path to prove I was right. I had a new, clearer one ahead, after our first project. Ember Studio quickly became recognized by educational and community organizations as a trusted destination for authentic storytelling campaigns. The press began to mention my name not for my old role, but as the founder of Austin's first emotional content startup, built on a foundation of healing and kindness in communication. I no longer needed to take revenge on anyone. My presence, the existence of Ember Studio, was the strongest response to how this industry had treated those who weren't skilled at fighting. One weekend, I returned to the Rivi campus not to meet anyone, but just to visit the old coffee shop nearby. I looked through the glass and saw the new employees, the meeting groups I had once been a part of. I didn't feel bitter. I only felt relieved, because, in the end, I had stepped out of the place that had pushed me down, and not only stood firm, but also created something I had never dared to dream of. This return wasn't loud, wasn't splashed across headlines, but it was more real than any spotlight. I returned, not to reclaim an old reputation, but to live by my true values, and this time, no one could take that away from me. I never imagined that my return would unfold so quietly, yet still be strong enough to make those who once looked down on me take a second glance. Ember Studio didn't appear on any fast-growing business lists, nor did we win big awards at media festivals. But every video we produced, every story we told for the community, spread like an underground current, slow but persistent. Each time a new client reached out, they didn't ask us how many awards we had, but how we made people cry in just 2 minutes, and what allowed us to maintain an authentic voice in an era when everything could be twisted to get views. The answer was always the same, because I once had my voice taken from me, and I didn't want anyone to feel that way again. There is no nobler revenge than turning pain into a tool that helps others avoid suffering, as I once did. And I realized that every time I read a thank you note from a stranger after watching our videos. One autumn afternoon, while adjusting the final version of a new project we had collaborated on with a healthcare organization for the elderly, I received a surprising message from an unknown number. The message contained only one line: "I was wrong. If you have time, I'd like to meet and talk." Beneath it was the signature Natalie. I set my phone down, not replying immediately. The first feeling wasn't gloating or suspicion, but a deep silence. It was as if so many things that once haunted me had now receded so far into the past that they could no longer hurt me. I had moved beyond the stage of proving I was right. Now, I only chose to listen if it was truly necessary for my own peace. After a few days of thinking, I agreed to meet. The cafe was located in North Loop, a place I used to visit when I first started my journey back. It still had the same decor, the smell of wood and freshly brewed coffee gently filling the air. Natalie arrived 5 minutes late. She no longer had the polished look I remembered from our last meeting at Revi. Her makeup was light, her hair neatly tied back, her eyes tired but direct. We greeted each other as old acquaintances. No hugs, no pleasantries. She placed her bag aside, looked at me, and spoke calmly. I used to think I was better than you, not because of skill, but because I knew how to take control first. But eventually, I realized, if you choose silence, it doesn't mean you're not seeing everything. I didn't say anything. She continued. I've lost almost everything since that incident. Contracts were canceled. My reputation is gone. My colleagues left. I even lost my belief in what I once thought was right. I stayed silent, not because I lacked words, but because I didn't want to stop the flow of thoughts she was sharing. She exhaled slowly. You may not believe it, but I truly want to apologize, not to take anything back, just to say clearly, I finally understand. I looked at her for a long moment. There was no resentment left in my heart. I had moved far beyond where I had been knocked down. I said, slowly and clearly, I'm not angry with you anymore, not because what you did is forgivable, but because I can't carry it with me another day. Natalie nodded, perhaps understanding that was the deepest level of forgiveness I could offer. We parted ways at the cafe door, with no promises, no further contact. The meeting didn't open anything up. It was simply a clean closure to an old chapter. 2 months later, Ember Studio was invited to present at a regional community media conference with the theme Storytelling to Create Social Impact. I stood on a small stage, the light on my face soft and warm. In front of me were over 200 people from the industry, including teachers, independent filmmakers, and representatives from nonprofit organizations. I didn't present strategies or results. I simply told my story, from being pushed out of the very campaign I created, to the journey of starting over from a folder of forgotten files on my personal computer. I didn't name anyone or criticize anyone. I just told the story of a person who lost everything due to betrayal, but chose to take revenge through success. When I finished with the words, some pains are unavoidable, but they can be transformed if we choose to tell them in a way that allows us to move forward. There was a moment of silence in the room, followed by applause that lasted for a long time. I knew I was no longer standing in the shadows. After the conference, a student approached me saying that the video I made last year about the woman who lost her voice after a car accident was the very reason she chose to pursue a career in communications. She told me she had been depressed, once thinking no one understood what it felt like to be invisible, until she watched that video and realized someone had been through the same pain, but still found a way to tell their story. I looked into her eyes and saw the version of me from the past, not the person who had won, but the one learning how to live on. That night, I went home, turned on the small kitchen light, made a cup of tea, and sat back at my old desk, the one where I sat on the first night after leaving Revi. Nothing around me had changed much, but I no longer tried to prove anything. I simply continued doing meaningful work, one day at a time. My return didn't need to be announced, didn't need applause. It was in the fact that I could look back at everything and smile, not with bitterness, not with regret, because sometimes the greatest thing isn't defeating anyone. It's getting back up, moving forward, and letting time prove that I've been on the right path all along.